Hello to everybody. This is Cristina Mattiello. I am a teacher, so we are colleagues, although I have just retired. I taught humanities, which is Italian, Latin, history, and geography in a high school in Rome. I enjoyed my work very much, and I found it very important in the building of a better society focused on solidarity, peace, and justice. I also am an academical researcher. I explored the role of religion, Catholic and Protestant religions, in the United States social history, seeing it especially in the Afro American civil rights movement, in feminist theologies, in peace movements. I'm a journalist too. I write for some grassroots journals of the interreligious critical area in Italy. My topics are human rights, minorities, migrants. And finally, I am the president of CIPAX, in Italian we say CIPAX, Interreligious Center for Peace, an association which was founded in 1982 by Gianni Novelli, and since then has been very active in peace building in Italy, but also at an international level, in Europe, especially Germany, United States, and Latin America. We do cultural work, but also actively participate to peace movements. I will be with you for 5 units for our educational course for European teachers about integration and social inclusion. Now I'm going to share with you my PowerPoint. Just wait a moment. So this is the general title. And I wanted to open the course with the preamble of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We'll talk about it later in slide 7. I wanted to open with this text because I think it must be a guiding principle as educators, but also, I think, in our daily individual and social life. It declares that we cannot have real freedom, justice, and peace if the rights of all the people are not fully respected. Everybody must have their dignity recognized and guaranteed. Equal and inalienable rights for all people in the world is a principle which is constantly violated, unfortunately. That's why we have to stress it, communicate its importance also to our students. Slide 3, you can see the general index of the units I will present to you. Part 1, a small introduction, and then migrants. Unit 2, inclusive education, and then ageism. Unit 3, poverty and minorities. Unit 4, people in jail and mental health. Unit 5, people with disabilities. For this, I worked with another person, Luciano Artesi. Unit 1, migrants index. In slide 4, as you can see, you find the titles of all the slides, so you can have a general view of the unit, and you'll be able to find some specific topics more easily. All the units have this structure, with the slides detailed index at the beginning. Here you can see from slide 1 to slide 14, a small introductory section, which is meant for all the groups, all the marginalized groups we're going to talk about. And then from slide 15 on, migrants. At the end of any unit, you will find a bibliography. In slide 5, we'll begin with some basic terms. Language is very important. We have to be very aware of this. A correct and conscious terminology is of crucial importance when talking about marginalities, because incorrect definitions can hide a subtle discrimination, which we must avoid. The concepts you will find here are general concepts which have to do with all marginality groups. So before focusing on them one by one, we have to make clear these terms, clear to ourselves as persons, to ourselves as educators, and to our students. Social inclusion is the focus of our course. I wrote here the official United Nations definition. It is centered on equal opportunities for all and on the possibility for everybody to feel their potentialities. Participation in a full sense, also at the political level, guarantees that social inclusion is real. Stigma, unfortunately, is inherent to a minority status, and we have to contrast it with all our commitment. In the last paragraph here, I have referred to the United Nations Agenda 2030, which we'll talk about later on in slide 8. Here I only notice that social inclusion is a widespread goal in the agenda, and it is specifically mentioned in Goal 4, Quality Education, 10, Reduced Inequalities, and 11, Sustainable Cities and Communities. Now we will analyze some other basic terms. And I'd like to stress the difference between integration and interaction. Integration is, of course, a positive concept, and it must be one of our goals. But if we read its definition, the official United Nations definition again, we find that it also hides some problems. Of course, we want that a minority group person can feel at ease within the system of shared rules and habits of the majority of the country where he or she lives, at ease within its system of shared rules and habits. Everybody should have a sense of belonging also to the new community they live in. But we have to be careful. This good process must not be a forced homologation process. All equal cannot mean that the socially weaker group has to forget and deny its cultural roots and heritage. That is to give up its different habits and hide or annihilate its specific characteristics. In some way, I prefer the concept of interaction because it implies a peer-to-peer exchange of cultural suggestions. Both parts reciprocally respect each other, and it is clear that diversity enriches society. They are not a menace to a supposed fixed and unchangeable identity. To meet other cultures helps growing from all points of view, also from the economic point of view. And human rights are a fundamental guideline, as we have already seen. In slide 7, I talk about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I have already showed its fundamental preamble. Here we can also partially see Article 1, and I'd like to read it together with you. All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in a spirit of brotherhood. I should say brotherhood and sisterhood. Then I synthesized the declaration structure, a preamble, you already seen it in slide 2, 30 articles about civil and political rights, economic, social, and cultural rights in the community. This is very important because freedom, equal opportunities, justice, in a word, rights, are not related only to formal and juridical factors. They are also related and depend on socio-economic situations, socio-economic status. Now I would like to read from the United Nations official website something about the declaration. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights is a milestone document in the history of human rights, drafted by representatives with different legal and cultural backgrounds from all regions of the world. The declaration was proclaimed by the United Nations General Assembly in Paris on December the 10th, 1948, General Assembly Resolution 217A, as a common standard of achievements for all peoples and all nations. It sets out, for the first time, fundamental human rights to be universally protected. And it has been translated into over 500 languages. The declaration is widely recognized as having inspired and paved the way for the adoption of more than 70 human rights treaties applied today on a permanent basis at global and regional levels, all containing references to it in their preambles. And I'd like to read here Article 30. No one has the right to act against all these rights. It is crucial to remember this today because unfortunately, we see it constantly badly violated on the basis of political, economic, and military strength in order to oppress other weak peoples. Slide 8. Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development. First of all, the concept of sustainable development is meeting the present needs without compromising the possibility for future generations to meet their own needs. So it implies balancing economic, environmental, and social factors. And now, again, I'm reading from the agenda official site. Here you see the official table, which I think is very good to understand it. The agenda is a plan of action for people, planet, and prosperity. It also seeks to strengthen universal peace in larger freedom. We recognize that eradicating poverty in all its forms and dimensions, including extreme poverty, is the greatest global challenge and an indispensable requirement for sustainable development. All countries and all stakeholders acting in collaborative partnership will implement this plan. We are resolved to free the human race from the tyranny of poverty and want to heal and secure our planet. We are determined to take the transformative steps which are urgently needed to shift the world onto a sustainable and resilient path. As we embark on this collective journey, we pledge that no one will be left behind. This is a very beautiful sentence. No one will be left behind. The 17 Sustainable Development Goals and 169 targets, which we are announcing today, demonstrate the scale and ambition of this new universal agenda. They seek to realize the human rights of all and to achieve gender equality and the empowerment of all women and girls. They are integrated and indivisible and balance the three dimensions of sustainable development: the economic, social, and environmental dimensions. This is a very beautiful program that was written the first day, the day when the declaration was approved and the agenda was approved, but unfortunately it is not so implemented right now. It doesn't seem that we are really on the right path. But just for this, as educators, we must show the agenda to our students and discuss with them about its fundamental guiding principles. I wanted to focus on the crucial role of education again, Education paves the ground to build an inclusive society. It's a primary agent in the process of building a society where all the people and mostly vulnerable groups can have their rights respected, their dignity fully recognized, and equal opportunities. We have to be conscious of the importance of our role as educators and teachers. If young generations do not believe in equal dignity and rights for all, an inclusive project will necessarily fail. It doesn't matter how good it is. And teachers are the ones who can show young people that an inclusive society is good, and I should say better, also for the majority group. In a cohesive, including, and non-violent society, everybody can fulfill their potentialities for the benefit of all. In slide 10, I wanted to talk about intersectionality, quite a new concept. The term was first used by some United States feminists who repeated that Afro-American women are twice oppressed as women, gender discrimination, and as blacks, race discrimination. Intersectionality means that two or more discriminating factors are active together at the same time in a marginalized group or individual. So this became a widely applied concept. Poverty, for instance, is a very common intersectional factor because marginalization often prevents a good economic status, but also mental health is quite common. Being in a disadvantaged position in a society can produce depression and mental problems. Intersectionality creates a very bad cycle, which is very difficult to break. The more one person is marginalized, the more remain poor, the more is discriminated, the more is depressed, and so on. And this is another very interesting concept, decolonializing. Decolonializing our view. It comes from anthropology, and it's very important for educators and teachers because it has to do with their own opinions and intimate beliefs. It needs to be studied and rationally understood, but also emotionally elaborated. We cannot really help our students to overcome their discriminator attitudes if we do not work on this. In other words, we have to learn ourselves how to see that others as really equal and how to feel it deep inside. Decolonializing means to overcome a Eurocentric perspective. One of the books which first pointed out this idea of decolonializing our views is Decolonializing Methodologies, a book by the New Zealand anthropologist Linda Tuhiwai Smith, written in 1999. It set the scene for an extensive critique of Western paradigms of research and knowledge from the position of an indigenous and colonized Maori woman. It explored the intersection of research and colonialism and critiques the term research itself. The decolonialization of research methods will help to respect the indigenous rights and their cultural dignity, their ways of living and being. And it will help us to overcome our Eurocentric vision. This concept is now applied to all fields which has to do with marginality. The roots of the concept of decolonizing can be traced in a book which was very famous in the 60s of the last century and gave a strong political contribute to the political process of decolonialization of African countries, Frantz Fanon, The Wreck of the Earth. Decolonializing our views means we'll get to believe that other cultures can teach us important things. And this is exactly what we see in slide 12. Ubuntu is a perfect example of decolonializing our thoughts and recognize what other cultures can give to us. It is a beautiful idea We really should not only teach to our students, but also live in our daily life. It comes from Africa, where in rural and indigenous areas, believe me, is not a rhetorical statement, but something you can feel in the way people relate to you. Their kindness and generous acceptance is something we have to learn from. Ubuntu means that I am because we are. Nobody can see one's life as isolated. We are related to community, and our own identity depends on that. We're all interconnected to one another and to the environment. The well being of the community and of the earth comes before any individual interest. Ubuntu is founded on respect, dignity for all, justice, and healing when a society has known violence and evil. Ubuntu was the guiding principle of the process of reconciliation and healing guided by Nelson Mandela after his liberation at the end of the apartheid. So he could heal the country, building a new society where oppressed and oppressors could stay together, having shared a common path to justice. And I think that today it is very, very important to recall that memory. In slides 13 and 14, I put a multiple choice questionnaire. I really experimented with a history and philosophy colleague as an interdisciplinary approach that we call civic education. We gave them to all the fourth year students in our high school. High school in Italy has a 5-year curriculum. The questionnaire was strictly anonymous, so students could feel free when they answered in a way that could be problematic to their teachers. For each vulnerable groups, women, LGBT plus people, migrants and minorities, poor and homeless people, people with disabilities, people with mental diseases, people detained in jail, young and old people, we put a first common question, which is, do you think they suffer discrimination which require an institutional action? This is a very important question because many of our students, unfortunately, thought that these groups, these marginalized groups, some of them at least, don't suffer really discrimination. And above all, that they don't require any institutional action because we have something else to think about, to worry about in our society. So we have to discuss that very much. And then we wanted to get articulated data about their discrimination attitudes. And the results were very interesting. We asked the students to help us to collect the data and elaborate them. And then we analyzed them with them in a comparative way. At the end, we discussed them, trying to challenge some stereotyped images and hostile attitudes. And we have to know what our students really think about the rights of marginalized groups if we want to work for a more inclusive society in an effective way. In slide 15, we have the second part of the unit, migrants, some basic terms. We start from a generally accepted definition and two basic concepts. Migrants are people on the move. They have left their home and are seeking a place to build their new life. Push factors and pull factors. Pull factors are reasons which encourage or force migrants to leave. War, violence, persecution for political or religious reasons, ethnic identity, or gender orientation leave no choice to these migrants who are called forced migrants. Another factor can be extreme poverty, economic migration, consequences of climate changes or natural or human disasters are factors very widespread today. Two, climate migration, and some of these elements altogether. We have to say something about this. For forced migrants, we say that they have no choice. Their lives are in danger and they have to leave. They're in a very bad material and psychological condition, and they have already suffered violence in many different forms. But people can leave also because of their severe economic condition. These people are not considered forced migrants, but in a way they are forced migrants because extreme poverty can make life impossible. European countries don't recognize that, and I think this is not very good. And perhaps European countries forget that they had been migration countries themselves in the 19th and 20th century. Climate change and desertification, ecocides, which are so frequent nowadays, also because of wars, can be strong push factors too. Also, in this case, we cannot formally say it is a forced migration, but it can easily be, and will be important to formally recognize it as such, to help them to come in a legal way. Pull factors are those characteristics of the richest countries that can attract people from poor areas. Some people can believe that in Western countries it is easier to develop one's potentialities, fulfill one's economic and social goals, get better education. These migrants are not forced to leave, but we have to remember that migration should be a right for everybody. Slide 16, refugees and asylum seekers. It is important to know the difference between them and the other migrants. Asylum keepers are forced migrants whose life is clearly in danger in their country of origin and seek international protection in another. They have already suffered a severe persecution, but their claim can be accepted by the country of destination, and so they are officially recognized as refugees, or it can be rejected. They sometimes are left waiting for a long time. This happens in Italy, for instance, many, many times. But asylum, if one's life is in danger, is to be considered a human right and should be given to all those who legitimately ask for it. Unfortunately, today asylum keepers are often rejected, both in Europe and United States, and recognized refugees do not receive the support and protection they should have according to the international law and in particular to the Geneva Convention 1951. In slides 17 and 18, I reported the official international legislation by migrants. United States, here slide 17, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 14, everyone has the right to seek and enjoy asylum from persecution in other countries. 2, United Nations Refugee Convention and Geneva Convention 1951, Article 33. This is very important. No contracting state shall expel or return, be fuller, a refugee in any manner whatsoever to the frontiers or territories where his life or her life or freedom would be threatened on account of his race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group and political opinion. This is called principle of non-refoulement. Refoulement means forced return. And number 3, about families, International Convention on the Protection of the Rights of all migrant workers and members of their families. Today, the violation of Article 14 of the Declaration and of the non-refoulement principle are so common and widespread that we can almost say that the United Nations legislation is not respected any longer. It seems to be disclaimed by the strongest and richest countries. Also, the right to have one family is protected by law is very difficult to get. It is a very bad situation which is on today. This is European legislation. About this, we have to say that Europe has been founded on the values of human rights and international solidarity. European legislation about migrants used to be quite good, but now is changing and getting stricter. The 2024 Pact on Migration and Asylum is officially aimed to make the asylum procedures, but also return procedures, faster. Security is the guiding principle instead of human international solidarity. Among the four pillars, robust, which means very strict control and screening, is the first. But people who are in danger should be accepted anyway, according to United Nations law, as we have seen. The point about border procedures is linked to returns again, forced returns again, border procedures and returns. Solidarity associations fear that it will be very hard for rejected migrants to defend oneself with a legal assistance and trial. There are some numbers of migrants. They're very high in the world, but irregular migrants have decreased in Europe by 38% in 2024. And here I mentioned the three main routes for migrants towards Europe: Central route, the Mediterranean route, and Western route, the Balkan route, which have decreased in a significant way. The Western route through Canarias has increased as the English Channel ones, from France to England. These are migrants' arrival documents. I thought it can be useful for our students to know about that because they're very often mentioned. ID document, an entry permit for working or studies. Legal migrants have regular ID documents and entry permits. So they can begin their inclusion path. Forced, but also many economic migrants do not have time and neither the opportunity to get regular documents. So they are in a terribly vulnerable position. They can suffer violence and abuses while traveling, and repression, discrimination, exploitation when they have arrived. Life, violence, pushbacks, detention, expulsion, exploitation, and new slavery condition. Dehumanization in their public image, which exposed them to widespread discrimination. All migrants should have the opportunity to arrive through safe routes in a formally regular way. Today, Solidarity Association try to get from the government's permission to open humanitarian corridors, which are used for fragile migrants, very vulnerable migrants, and in particular for real people who can be assisted in European hospital. In slide 21, we see particularly vulnerable categories of migrants, those who suffer from gender discrimination, women, LGBT plus people, and then we see minors. They are all exposed to violence and all kinds of abuses. Migrant minors, in particular non-accompanied minors, who are those who travel alone without any adult taking care of them, are protected by very good international laws. An international convention of the rights of the child was approved by the United Nations in 1959. Their rights are even extended regardless of their legal status. Education, healthcare, basic assistance needs, right to a legal identity, protection from abuse and exploitation, and the right to have their best interests be the primary consideration in all decisions affecting them. This is very important because every single minor should have his or her condition and needs really considered and respected. Unfortunately, again, reality is different, and many migrant minors do not have their rights respected when they are in the receiving country. They are exposed to abuse, kidnappings, or introduced into criminal circles, although many solidarity organizations try to follow and protect them. Slide 22. Negative receptions of immigrants. Here I synthesize the most important terms refer to negative acceptance of migrants. This is all we have to contrast and challenge through education. First of all, we have to help our students to understand the specific terminology so that they can recognize these attitudes around them in their daily life. Discrimination, intolerance, xenophobia, racism, apartheid, segregation. All research states that discrimination, especially against Black people and Muslims, is widespread in Europe. But no inclusion is possible if we do not help young people to overcome a negative view of migrants, if we want to build a cohesive and peaceful society. I want to focus on apartheid and segregation. They mean to separate a weaker community from the rest of the country, not only with social discrimination, but also by law. People who suffer from apartheid cannot do things the majority people can do, cannot have access to some places and activities, including some jobs. They also can have movement restrictions. In most cases, they live in ghettos. In the extreme cases, they are formally limited in their going out of these ghettos. But even if there is not a specific limiting law, they feel compressed in that area and isolated. Ghettos create a vicious circle. Young people feel they have no positive expectations in life. They do not think that their condition could be better. So they can be easily attracted by criminal circles, and marginalization is never overcome. In slide 23, we can synthetically explore two theoretical concepts which can help us to understand some of the deep roots of racism. The sociologist and philosopher Zygmunt Bauman elaborated the idea of liquid fear, a sense of widespread menace whose origin is not clear. It is a very spread and effective feeling. People feel uneasy and not safe, so they look for scapegoats to blame for that. And migrants, especially Blacks and Muslims, are the perfect ones, the perfect scapegoats. They become the object of the people's violent reactions to fear. So they are victims of hate speech, but also of physical violence. Liquid fear also favors the acceptance and search for repressive laws and regimes. Svetan Todorov is a philosopher who was the first to analyze the dynamics of the question of the other, which he saw at first in the so-called discovery of America, which he called Conquest of America. Then he went back to the subject on human diversity. Here I refer to one of his latest books, The Fear of the Barbarians, 210. Also, Todorov points out the fear of the other that is widespread in Western and richest countries. He analyzed the unmotivated prejudices and the sense of superiority of the white people and their violent attitudes. They are not those who have civilization, Todorov says. On the contrary, they, the Western people, they are the real barbarians. Slide 24. Now let's try to see how we can promote a positive process of inclusion of immigrants. No inclusion can be reached if rights are not guaranteed for all migrants. They also need to be effectively supported, especially in the first period after their arrival. with languages courses, legal assistance, temporary housing, help in the search for jobs. Migrant integration is the dynamic two-way process, which has to imply a real interaction and must be aimed at a real participation in every field of societal life. A serious problem is that irregular migrants, those who do not have regular entry documents, risk to be arrested and detained in special centers, which are like jails or even worse. But the lack of the requested documents is not a penal crime. It is only an administrative irregularity. People in this condition should be helped and respected anyway in their dignity. Education is always a central role. Citizenship is formally being a member of a specific country and having rights and duties for this. It is the final aim of the inclusion process. Here, there are some terms which are related to citizenship, so that students, when they hear about them in public debates and media, can understand them. Naturalization, jus solis, jus sanguinis, statelessness. I pointed out the differences between birthright citizenship and descent citizenship. Here, I want to say that the condition of statelessness is very sad, absurd, and unjust. But in many cases, is the only way not to be a sort of formally non-existing person, a sort of ghost for the society. Strict citizenship laws, like the Italian ones, for instance, are serious obstacles for a harmonious society. They create strong psychological and social problems and also prevent many people to fulfill their potentialities in a positive way, which is good for the whole country. So we have to support the efforts to improve citizenship laws. Slide 26. European inclusion programs. European institutions have many programs to help migrants' inclusion. Here you can find some examples and you can look for them in the websites I pointed out for you. You have descriptions of different activities which promote interaction and integrations. The International Organization for Migration, IOM, has elaborated 7 recommendations for the inclusion of migrants, which is very important to know. But many programs are also implemented by grassroots solidarity associations and groups. Their activities have a very significant roles because migrants can feel at ease in this more informal and sympathetic context. Here, the peer-to-peer cultural exchange is easier and human relations very often are established in a very spontaneous way. In slide 27, we see intercultural education, which is the basis of the inclusion process. Intercultural education must promote interaction, which is knowledge and respect of other cultures, developing exchange communication abilities through language courses, but also through common activities and personal relations. And then look for the help of mediators and volunteers from the solidarity context to promote significant exchanges of experiences, teaching that rights must be for all, otherwise they're not effective. Students must be helped to believe in an inclusive global society founded on cooperation and solidarity, and they must be motivated to participate in building it. In slide 28, 29, and 30, I present a very interesting didactical unit, which I really suggest you to apply if you don't know, if you don't have already done that. Peters map demonstrates in a scientific way that geography is not neutral and that even maps can have a biased approach. Peterson helps us to overcome a Eurocentric vision in geography. The geographical projection which we use in Europe is the projection drawn by Gerardus Mercator, a Flemish geographer and cartographer, in 1569. You can see it here. It was a map for navigation. It was the age of exploration and conquest, as Todorov said, conquest of very far lands. Among the 4 parameters you have to try to reproduce in plan maps of the Earth, of course, the Earth is spherical, so it's impossible to have a perfect reproduction. So these 4 parameters we try to reproduce: angles, proportion of the areas, distances, and forms. Only one can be perfectly proportionally produced. The second quite well reproduced, and the third in a just acceptable way, the fourth very badly, decisively badly. Mercator's projection respects angle and distances because it was for navigation. But there is something strange. Europe is the center of the map, precisely Germany. The equator is not the center of the map, but much below. So that the northern hemisphere appears to be much larger than the southern one. So the 4th parameter which is not respected is areas, proportionality of the areas. So Peters drew a map which was equivalent. This is the scientific definition for that. This means that the proportionality of the real areas and the areas of the map is perfectly respected. The shapes of the different areas are not respected, but the relation among the different area is correct. So it is amazing to discover that South America and Africa are much larger than Europe and North America, for instance. We know that if an area is larger, it tends to be perceived as more important. Mercator's map expresses a Eurocentric vision of the world, while Peters' map is a decolonialized map. In fact, India looks much larger than England, its colonial country, as it really is. Peters' map is so didactically effective. It can show students what a Eurocentric vision is, much better than many theoretical lessons. We should have the courage to use printed maps. It was done in the 60s and the 70s in solidarity contexts. I can suggest you to order a whole very nice didactical kit about Peters' map, right into ASAL, ASAL, Association for Latin America. You can see its website address in the bottom of the slide. Last slide presents a case study, a small case study, an example of a successful inclusion experience in Italy. Riace, a small Calabria village in the southern coast of Italy, had a visionary mayor who used the institutional funds for migrants he received to really promote the inclusion of migrants and save the village from a bad socioeconomic decay. The village was dying because of immigration, no job opportunities, abandoned house, widespread poverty. So he rented this abandoned house for migrants. He promoted many community activities in order to facilitate inclusion and have economy live again. Its project was very successful, and Riace had a new, very interesting and rich multicultural life that was good for everybody, also for the local community. For instance, school reopened, shops reopened, and for very good for migrants, of course. Here you can see the photograph of a small ethnic shop. But Mimmo Lucano was charged with false motivations by all those who do not believe in inclusion, who are strongly against migrants. They didn't want to see that such a project could be successful. Mimmo Lucano was then totally acquitted, of course, but it was very, very sad to see that. But today, for those who believe in solidarity in Italy, is still an important and beautiful symbol. In slide 31, you find the bibliography, institutional websites with the documents I mentioned, and the books I referred to. So thanks. This was our first unit together. I'll see you very soon with the others. Bye-bye.